All right, everybody, buckle up, because today we are diving deep into U.S.-Canada relations. And let me tell you, things are a little interesting right now. Incoming U.S. President Donald Trump has been making some waves with his comments about our neighbors to the north. And, well, Canadians are not exactly staying quiet about it.
Yeah, it's certainly a fascinating situation. The reactions we're seeing, particularly on social media, really highlight the anxieties and strong emotions this whole thing is stirring up.
Oh, absolutely. Over on the Air Canada subreddit, Canadians are letting loose with everything from witty comebacks to serious concerns about losing their health care, the whole shebang. But at the heart of it all, it's Trump's repeated suggestions about Canada becoming part of the U.S. that's really got people talking. Some might even call them jokes. But he's even gone so far as to call Trudeau a governor and refer to Canada as the 51st state.
And it's that language, that framing of Canada as somehow subordinate that's really hitting a nerve. It's important to remember this isn't just some offhand remark. These comments, especially when they're amplified on platforms like Truth Social, carry weight, and they shape public perception.
For sure. And it leaves everyone wondering, is he serious? Is he just trolling for attention? Or could there be something more strategic going on here? I mean, he's even gone as far as to suggest benefits for Canada, like tax cuts and increased military protection if they were to join the U.S.
Right, and that brings up a crucial question. What are Trump's motivations? If we look at his history, his tendency to use this kind of provocative language, maybe distract from other issues or maybe to gain some leverage in negotiations, well, it suggests that there might be more to this than meets the eye.
Okay, so maybe these jokes are actually calculated. Maybe a way to lay the groundwork for some upcoming trade deals or to appeal to a specific segment of his base back home.
It's definitely a possibility. And we have to remember this isn't the first time U.S.-Canada relations have been a bit rocky. Historically, there have been periods of tension, over trade resources, even defense. But what feels different this time around is the way these issues are being brought up, the style and the platform being used.
Right. It's all very public and in your face. So how is Canada responding to all of this?
Well, Trudeau seems to be taking a more subtle approach. He put out a single tweet linking to a 2010 NBC video about Canada narrated by Tom Brokaw.
Interesting choice, isn't it? Rather than directly addressing Trump's rhetoric, Trudeau seems to be trying to change the narrative. It's like he's reminding the world, and maybe Americans specifically, about Canada's own unique identity, their contributions, their independence.
Yeah, almost like he's saying, hey, we're doing pretty great on our own things. In the video, It's pure Canadiana. Stunning landscapes, iconic hockey moments, this underlying message of resilience and self-reliance. It's definitely a strategic use of soft power, relying on imagery and emotion to counter a more aggressive approach. Now, whether it'll be effective with someone like Trump, well, that remains to be seen.
We'll have to wait and see. But other Canadian officials have taken a bit of a different tack. Ambassador Hillman has been downplaying Trump's comments, and Foreign Affairs Minister Jolie's even been cracking jokes about Republicans moving to Canada.
Haha. So does this difference in response mean Canada doesn't have a clear strategy? Or is it just a reflection of how complex the situation really is? I mean, there's no easy playbook for dealing with someone like Trump, someone whose actions often seem to go against typical diplomatic norms.
It's a tough balancing act for sure. They need to protect Canada's interests and sovereignty without making things worse.
Exactly. And we can't forget about the potential economic consequences. Professor Ettinger has argued that these comments from Trump might actually be a distraction from a much bigger issue, the threat of trade tariffs.
Oh man, those tariffs. That's something that came up a lot in that Reddit thread too. Canadians are really worried about the impact those could have on their wallets. Things like higher prices for groceries, cars, even lumber.
It's a valid concern.
And Professor Ettinger suggests that these annexation comments might be a way to make Canadians more open to a trade deal that benefits the U.S., even if it ends up costing Canada in the long run.
It's an interesting theory, basically that Trump's manipulating the conversation, playing on those anxieties to get what he wants.
So we've got Canadians reacting with humor, anxiety, even defiance. We've got Trump making these annexation jokes that may have hidden motives. And we've got Canadian officials trying to walk this tightrope between protecting their interests and preventing things from escalating. Where do we even go from here?
Well, before we get into potential strategies and what the future might hold, I think it's important to understand this concept of sovereignty a little better.
You're right. It's a word we hear a lot.
Right.
But what does it actually mean in this context? Why are Canadians so worried about losing it?
Sovereignty at its core is the right of a nation to govern itself. to make its own decisions without being controlled by outside forces. It's about having control over your borders, your laws, your resources, and your foreign policy.
So when Trump talks about Canada becoming part of the U.S., he's essentially saying they would lose the ability to make their own decisions.
That's one way to interpret it. And for many Canadians, the idea of losing that autonomy, of having another government making decisions for them, is deeply unsettling. It really gets to the heart of what it means to be Canadian.
And it's not just about national pride, right? There are real, tangible consequences to losing sovereignty.
Absolutely. Think about things like environmental regulations, social programs, even cultural policies. If Canada were to become part of the U.S., their ability to set their own standards and priorities in these areas would be significantly reduced.
So sovereignty is about independence, self-determination, the ability to shape your own destiny. And it's something that Canadians clearly value very deeply.
Exactly. And that's what makes the situation so tense. It raises fundamental questions about identity autonomy and the future of Canada. So we've talked about this idea of sovereignty and how important it is to Canadians. But beyond the, symbolic aspect of it all, there are some very real and practical implications we need to consider, especially when it comes to healthcare.
Yeah, healthcare was a huge topic in that Reddit thread we talked about. Canadians are really protective of their universal healthcare system, and the thought of losing it is, well, pretty scary for a lot of people.
And for good reason. The U.S. healthcare system is very different. It relies much more on private insurance and often comes with incredibly high out-of-pocket costs. For a lot of Americans, access to good healthcare depends on whether they have a job and how much money they make.
It's a totally different system. And remember how Trump was talking about tax cuts as a benefit of joining the U.S.? Well, a lot of Canadians see their taxes as an investment in things like healthcare and education.
That's right. It's a fundamental difference in values and priorities. Canadians see those social programs as essential to their quality of life, and they're willing to pay taxes to support them. It's like a social contract where everyone contributes and everyone benefits.
So trading our healthcare system for lower taxes isn't exactly a selling point for most Canadians.
Exactly. It shows just how different the two countries are when it comes to the role of government and social services. And this brings us back to sovereignty. If Canada were to become part of the U.S., their ability to keep their own social safety net, including healthcare, would be seriously at risk.
Okay, so let's say hypothetically Canada did become part of the U.S. What would that actually look like legally and constitutionally? Is it even possible?
From a practical standpoint, it's extremely unlikely. The process would be incredibly complicated. You'd need to amend both the U.S. and Canadian constitutions, not to mention get approval from both governments and likely hold votes in both countries.
I imagine there would be a ton of legal battles along the way.
Oh, absolutely. There would be countless legal challenges about everything from property rights to provincial powers to indigenous treaties. It would be a constitutional lawyer's dream, or maybe their nightmare, depending on how you look at it.
Uh-huh. Okay, so legally and logistically, it's a long shot. But you know me, I always like to play devil's advocate. So let's just say, for argument's sake, that all those hurdles were somehow cleared. What would the economic implications be for everyday Canadians?
Well, we've already touched on the potential impact of tariffs, but becoming part of the U.S. would bring a whole new set of economic factors into play. Canada's economy is structured differently from the U.S. economy. We have different industries, different regulations, different trade relationships.
So it wouldn't be a smooth transition?
Not at all. There would be winners and losers. Some industries might benefit from access to a larger market, while others might struggle to compete. There could be shifts in investment changes in the job market, fluctuations in currency values.
And what about things like environmental regulations and labor standards? Canada has stricter rules in some areas, and those might be hard to maintain under a U.S. system.
That's another important point. Trying to align those regulations could lead to weaker environmental protections or a rollback of worker rights, and that could have a big impact on the quality of life for Canadians.
It sounds like there's a lot of uncertainty and potential for things to be disrupted.
Absolutely. And that uncertainty is one of the main reasons people are so anxious about this issue. It's hard to predict what the long-term economic consequences would be. And that makes it tough for businesses to plan, for investors to make decisions, and for individuals to feel secure about their future.
So even if the legal challenges were overcome, the economic integration would be complicated and potentially messy.
Exactly. And that's why it's so important to really understand this issue. It's not just about national pride or political games. It's about real people's lives, their jobs, their futures.
Well said. It seems like no matter what happens politically, Canada needs to focus on making its economy stronger. Things like diversifying our trade partners, investing in key industries, fostering innovation.
Absolutely. Building a more robust and diverse economy is essential, not just to weather potential storms, but to set Canada up for success in the global market.
Okay, so we've talked about the legal complexities, the economic uncertainties, and the impact on things like healthcare. But there's another aspect we haven't discussed yet, the emotional and psychological impact on Canadians.
You're right. This whole situation is bringing up a lot of strong emotions: anxiety, anger, confusion, even a sense of betrayal.
Yeah, I can see that. It's not every day that someone questions whether your country should even exist, even if they say it's a joke.
Exactly. And for many Canadians, it feels like an attack on their identity, their values, their sense of belonging.
Especially when you consider the historical context. Canada has worked hard to establish its own identity, to be different from the U.S., to forge its own path.
And those efforts haven't always been met with support. Sometimes they've even been met with resistance or ridicule.
So this talk about annexation,
Yeah.
even if it's not serious, brings up those insecurities and reinforces those feelings of being dismissed or underestimated.
And that can have a huge impact on national morale and social cohesion. It can erode trust in institutions, fuel division and polarization, and create a sense of uncertainty about the future.
So how do we deal with all these complex emotions? How do we have a productive conversation about these issues without resorting to fear-mongering or nationalistic rhetoric?
It's a challenge for sure, but I think it starts with acknowledging those emotions, validating those anxieties, and creating spaces for open and honest dialogue.
So we need to listen to those concerns and try to understand where they're coming from, not just dismiss them as irrational or overblown.
Exactly. And that means listening to different perspectives, seeking out diverse voices, and challenging our own assumptions.
Maybe we can even use a little humor. After all, Canadians are known for being able to laugh at themselves.
Absolutely. Humor can be a great way to ease tension, build bridges, and remind ourselves that we're all in this together.
Okay, so we need to be aware of the emotional side of things, foster empathy and understanding, and maybe even find ways to laugh at the absurdity of it all.
Well said. And that brings us to the big question: how does Canada move forward? What strategies can we use to protect our interests, preserve our sovereignty, and navigate this uncertain time in our relationship with the U.S.?
So we've talked about all the anxieties, the historical context, the potential impact, and even the emotional roller coaster this whole situation has caused. But now the big question, where do we go from here? How does Canada move forward?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? And there's no easy answer. But I think a good place to start is to focus on what we can control, strengthening Canada's resilience and its position on the world stage.
So instead of worrying about the what-ifs of annexation, we focus on proactive measures to make sure Canada thrives no matter what.
Exactly. And one of the key strategies here is diversifying our economic and diplomatic relationships. We've talked about the potential fallout from those tariffs, but imagine if Canada wasn't so reliant on the U.S. market.
Right, spreading the risk, not putting all our eggs in one basket.
Yeah.
But how do we actually do that? Who else would we trade with?
That's where things get exciting. Canada has a real opportunity to build stronger partnerships with countries in Europe, Asia, and Latin America. Think about the CETA agreement we have with the European Union. That's a prime example of tapping into a massive market with shared values and a commitment to fair trade.
So it's not just about finding new customers for our goods, but also aligning ourselves with countries that share our values and priorities.
Exactly. And it's bigger than just trade. It's about building diplomatic alliances, collaborating on global issues like climate change and cybersecurity, and fostering cultural exchange programs.
I like that. It's like building a network of friends around the world, creating a support system that makes Canada stronger no matter what happens with the U.S.
That's a great way to put it. And along with expanding our international connections, there's another important piece: investing in Canadian innovation and talent.
Oh, this is where we get to talk about all the cool stuff Canadians are creating, right?
You got it. Think about the progress Canada has made in areas like AI, clean tech, and biotech. Canada has the potential to be a global leader in these sectors, creating high-paying jobs and attracting the best and brightest from around the world.
So it's about using our strengths, building on what we're already good at, and investing in the industries of the future.
Precisely.
Right.
And that means supporting research and development, encouraging entrepreneurship, and making sure our education system is preparing Canadians for the jobs of tomorrow.
It sounds like we're talking about a future where Canada is less dependent on the U.S., more connected to the world, and at the forefront of innovation. That's a pretty exciting vision.
It is, and it's a vision that's within reach. But achieving it requires a joint effort from all levels of government, the private sector, and most importantly, individual Canadians.
Wait, what can regular people like me actually do to help make that happen?
That's a great question. It starts with staying informed and engaged. Pay attention to what's happening, participate in thoughtful discussions, and hold our elected officials accountable. Support Canadian businesses and innovators. Be a vocal advocate for the values and policies that contribute to a strong and independent Canada.
So it's about being an active citizen, making informed choices, and using our voices to shape the future we want.
Exactly. And remember, this isn't about fear or isolation. It's about embracing the opportunities that come with being a global citizen while staying true to the values that make Canada special.
After talking through all of this, I'm feeling a lot more optimistic. It's easy to get caught up in the anxieties, but this deep dive has reminded me of Canada's strengths, its potential, and its resilient spirit.
I'm glad to hear that. And remember that video Trudeau tweeted, the one narrated by Tom Brokaw? It highlighted Canada's history of resilience, innovation, and compassion. Those are the qualities that will guide us forward no matter what challenges come our way.
Well said. This has been quite the journey, but I think we've managed to navigate these choppy waters and come up with a better understanding of the situation. And, dare I say, a renewed sense of hope for Canada's future.
Absolutely. And that's what these deep dives are all about, exploring complex issues, challenging our assumptions, and empowering ourselves with knowledge and insight. Thanks for joining us.
And to all our listeners out there, stay curious, stay engaged, and stay proud to be Canadian. We'll catch you on our next deep dive.